Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. I hope you're all well. I'm back with a video for Eating Disorders Awareness Week. I've made a few over the last few years and I wanted to continue that. So basically this week is Eating Disorders Awareness Week, and if you don't know already, I have quite a long history of eating disorders. I don't want to sit and tell my whole story because that would take up half the video. But basically when I was around 15, I developed depression and an eating disorder. Ended up spending about 7.5, 8 months in an adolescent unit when I was 17, 18. And then it's kind of carried on since then. In 2012 I was sectioned and again spent some time in an inpatient unit and then in day patient treatment. But yeah, I'm kind of doing alright at the moment. I still have wobbles, but I'm doing a lot better than I was. So that's just why I really want to raise awareness of eating disorders and share a bit of my story, I guess. This Eating Disorders Awareness Week, BEAT, which is the national UK charity for people with eating disorders, their kind of goal is to try and break down barriers and break down stereotypes of eating disorders, because all these different stereotypes and misconceptions about eating disorders can be dangerous. Basically it stops people from seeking help, and it stops the people who are there to supposedly give the help from giving it, because even doctors and nurses and people like that can be susceptible to stereotypes and thinking that eating disorders look a certain way. So yeah, for this video I thought I would break down some barriers and smash some stereotypes, can't speak, and just go through a few sort of common misconceptions about eating disorders, and just give my opinions and views on why they are correct or incorrect. Most of them are incorrect. I'm not going to start going into sort of scientific research and stuff like that. I'm sure if you want to Google that kind of stuff you will find it, but yeah, just from sort of the things that I've learned over the years and from things that I've found out from friends and professionals and stuff, I just thought I would talk about why a lot of these stereotypes are incorrect and hopefully help people to recognise eating disorders and seek help early. So let's get started. I've got quite a few misconceptions to get through, and yeah, I hope you find it helpful. So the first stereotype / misconception that I've got is that if you have an eating disorder then you don't like food, and this could not be further from the truth. I mean, obviously everybody is different and there will be people out there who don't like food and they do have an eating disorder, but generally if you've got an eating disorder it's not because you don't like food. Often you almost like food too much. Well, not too much, but I know with me, it's when my eating disorders have been really bad, I have actually been quite obsessed with food, to the point of sort of, I don't know, because I was starving myself, I might watch cooking programs or read food magazines and look at pictures on the internet of food and stuff, because I do enjoy food and I like food, but because I was denying myself that, you get to this point where you do become quite obsessed with food and stuff. So yeah, an eating disorder doesn't mean that you do not like food. It's just that's what kind of your symptoms kind of manifest themselves as. But yeah, most people that I've met with eating disorders definitely do like food. The next misconception is that people with eating disorders are just doing it for attention, they're attention seeking, or they're trying to get sympathy or something like that. So yeah, a lot of people will say that if you've got an eating disorder you are attention seeking, and again, this is completely wrong. Yes, there will be different situations and stuff, but I'm going to try and talk about the majority. Most people I know who've had eating disorders or who have eating disorders, myself included, will go to great lengths to hide the eating disorder, whether that's wearing like baggier clothes so people don't notice that you're losing weight, or being very, very secretive about behaviours and stuff like that. You know, most people with eating disorders, the last thing that they want is for people to know about it. I found it very, very difficult to open up about my eating disorder. One, because I think I hadn't fully like understood it myself and accepted the fact that I had an eating disorder myself, but also because I felt quite ashamed of like the behaviours that I was engaging in. I was really, really anxious that if I, you know, told people about my eating disorder, then they would make me stop. Basically, I didn't want to stop. I wanted to lose weight, and if people found out, I knew that they would get involved, and they'd take me to the doctors and stuff, and it would become a lot harder for me to continue with my eating disorder because that's the grip that it has on you. So yeah, it's a massive misconception that people with eating disorders are attention seekers, because yeah, in the vast majority of people, that is just, yeah, it's been the complete opposite. Another misconception is that eating disorders are a choice and that you can just snap out of it, you know, go and eat something and you'll be fine. I remember when I was in a general hospital and was really, really struggling with my eating disorder, and a doctor came round to like assess me and stuff and just said, oh, why don't you just go down to the cafe and eat a cupcake and you'll be all right. And I just thought, God, like, I wish it was that easy. You know, you don't make the choice to have an eating disorder. It's something I found that you slip into sometimes quite gradually, other times quite quickly, a lot of the time without even realising like where you're going. So it might start with like one thought and one like behaviour, and it just spirals. And you know, it's a mental illness. No mental illness is a choice. And you can't just snap out of it. It's like telling someone who's got a broken leg to snap out of it. It wouldn't work. And it's the same with any kind of mental illness, you know, including an eating disorder. Yeah, it's not a choice. Believe me, like, if it had been a choice, it's not a choice that I would have made, because why would you want to put yourself through all of that horrible, horrible stuff? For what? I don't understand how people, I think people look at it very simplistically as, oh, you're underweight, therefore you need to eat and then you'll be fine. But it's just not the case. You know, eating disorders have a lot of underlying causes. You know, it's not necessarily about the food, it's about a lot of the stuff that's going on underneath. And the way you deal with that is through like food and weight and things like that. So yeah, it's not a choice by any means, and you honestly, you cannot just snap out of it. The next misconception, and this is a huge misconception, is that you have to be thin to have an eating disorder. People have this image, I think, in their mind of what somebody with an eating disorder looks like. And that image is generally a woman, probably, with, you know, who is emaciated, and yeah, that's what they think of when they think of an eating disorder. They think, oh, I'd know if someone had an eating disorder because when I look at them, I'd be able to tell. And that could not be further from the truth. Yes, you know, some people you can tell if they have an eating disorder, if they are very underweight and they're very unwell in that sense, then yes, it is quite visible. But a lot of people with eating disorders are a healthy weight, are overweight, they just look normal. I hate that word, but you know, they don't look, you wouldn't know to look at them that they had an eating disorder. And there are so many different eating disorders as well, you know, it's not just anorexia. So not all eating disorders will necessarily make you lose weight. Some eating disorders can make you gain weight. So yeah, I think it's so important to know that you don't have to look a certain way to be struggling with an eating disorder. And this is so important, I think, for medical professionals to understand, because certainly more, I suppose, like towards the beginnings of my eating disorder, I wasn't underweight, and there's been a lot of time when I've been really, really struggling with my eating and my weight and things like that. But actually I've been at a healthy weight, and I've gone to see the doctors, and they'd be like, well, there's nothing wrong with you, you know, your weight's fine, so you must be all right. And it's so frustrating, because the problem is in your head. It's not, yeah, I mean, yes, it's obviously, if you are underweight, it's important to deal with that because you've got the physical implications, but it's the thoughts and the mental side of it that is where the eating disorder really, really lies. And you know, you could look anyway and be really, really struggling. I know people who have looked completely healthy, who have been, you know, in a really, really dark place, myself included, and you know, it's just so, it's so frustrating building up that courage and going to see a doctor or telling somebody and getting that response back, well, you look fine, so you must be fine. Yeah. And also, I think it's important to understand that if you are going through an eating disorder and you maybe aren't underweight, or you feel like you're not underweight enough, that doesn't matter. Like, you still deserve help. I know for me, I went through a lot of times when I would maybe look at other people with eating disorders and think, well, I'm not as thin as them, like I can't be as unwell as them, therefore, you know, oh, I don't deserve to have help. Like, if you're struggling with an eating disorder, no matter what you look like, no matter what your weight is, you still deserve to be listened to, and you deserve to get treatment. This next misconception kind of follows on from the last one, and it is that only teenage girls get eating disorders. And I think this is still something that so many people believe. Yeah, again, like, there is just this picture of like the kind of person that gets an eating disorder, and it tends to be a white female, fairly young, sort of teens, early 20s. Generally people think that it's quite sort of, I don't know, like well-off people that get eating disorders, and yeah, it's just not true. Like, eating disorders do not discriminate. It doesn't matter the colour of your skin, it doesn't matter what gender you are, it doesn't matter if you are rich or poor, it doesn't matter if you're straight, if you're gay. Basically it doesn't matter. Anybody can get an eating disorder. When I was in eating disorder treatment, we had men, women, like older people, younger people, there's been children, you know, young children can get eating disorders, like elderly people can get eating disorders. It doesn't discriminate. So again, I think it's important for medical professionals, but also just everyone else, to understand that, you know, anybody can have an eating disorder. And a lot of people, I think, especially with boys, you know, dismiss the fact, you know, it's very much still seen as a female illness. And, you know, I think overall, yes, more women than men do get eating disorders, but there are still so many men that have eating disorders. And I know, like, from speaking to men that I was in treatment with, they have found it so much harder to, one, open up about an eating disorder in the first place, and two, to then actually get the help. You know, they found it very difficult to admit that they had this eating disorder because of the stereotypes around you know, the people that supposedly get eating disorders. You know, they said that they would feel quite embarrassed because they felt like it was a woman's illness. And then going to a doctor, a lot of doctors still have that kind of misconception that men don't get eating disorders. So imagine you've like built up all this like fight to go and like say to the medical professionals, look, I've got an eating disorder, I need help, to then have them turn around and say, well, yeah, but you're a bloke, blokes don't get eating disorders. So it's really, I think it's really important to understand that an eating disorder, just like any other mental health or physical health problem, can affect anybody. It doesn't matter who you are, you know, yeah, anybody can get an eating disorder. The next misconception that I have heard quite a lot is that if you gain weight, then you must be recovered from your eating disorder. And this is something that I really did come across when I was in eating disorder treatment. Certainly, like when I went to get eating disorder treatment, a lot of it was based on your weight. So if your BMI was normal, it was really, really difficult to access any kind of support. So when I went into day patient treatment, their main aim is to make you gain weight, and I understand that it's important to gain weight safely and that they need to sort out, you know, the physical side of things, because that can get quite serious. But even among, you know, eating disorder professionals, it still seemed to be the case that they thought that because you were gaining weight you were doing better, when in reality, when I started gaining weight, I started to use other ways to control my eating and to, yeah, exert some kind of control over things. And actually I got more unwell as I gained weight. And yeah, it was so frustrating because people just didn't understand. They'd say, oh, you know, you're looking really well. And I know they were probably trying to be, you know, supportive and stuff, but, you know, yes, just because I had gained some weight didn't mean that my head was fixed. And a lot, yeah, like with a lot of eating disorders, you know, you haven't necessarily lost any weight, or you don't need to gain weight. So it's definitely a big like stereotype that weight gain equals recovery. Yes, it is part of recovery in some eating disorders, but there's a lot more stuff, you know, actually inside your head. That's the bit where you need like the most work probably. And you know, I've been a healthy weight for quite a long time, but I've had times when I've really been struggling. So yeah, weight gain definitely does not equal being recovered. The next misconception that I really want to address, because I think it's really important, is that eating disorders aren't serious, because believe me, they are massively serious. They can be life-threatening. I've known people to lose their lives through their eating disorders, and it's not just anorexia. Like, a lot of people can understand, I think, that with anorexia, if you lose a lot of weight, you become seriously ill and you do risk losing your life. But any eating disorders, whether it's like bulimia or even binge eating disorder, anything where you're controlling food and putting your body through extreme situations, is going to put your body at risk. And you know, I've heard of people with bulimia who have had heart attacks, or anorexia who've had heart attacks and died. You know, eating disorders kill. They're not just some fad where, you know, you don't eat properly or you purge for a bit and then that's it. They can last a long time. They put your body through all sorts of stress and difficulty, and not just like loss of life, other things. So for example, I have been diagnosed with osteopenia, so my bone density isn't what it should be, possibly down to the fact that I had sort of long periods of not eating properly. It can damage your teeth if you're like purging. Your skin and your hair are really not very nice when you are sort of not eating properly. It can damage your bowels, like all sorts of things. So yeah, anyone that says eating disorders that aren't serious really doesn't understand the full extent of what an eating disorder can do to you. So the next stereotype that I hear quite a lot is that eating disorders are just about the food and just about wanting to be thin. And yeah, it's just not right. Like, that's how the symptoms manifest themselves. So like for me, I had a lot of stuff going on, like with my mental health and my physical health, and was struggling to cope with that. And the eating disorder behaviour gave me some kind of control. Yes, I do get quite fixated on my weight, and I did or do struggle with feeling fat and wanting to lose weight, but that kind of, I suppose, is a cover for something a lot bigger that's going on. And you know, your brain kind of goes a bit skewed, because I look back at pictures now of when I was really underweight, and now I can see how underweight I was, but at the time I just couldn't see it. Yeah, it's definitely not just about wanting to be thin. That's sort of what your mind kind of focuses on, because it gives you some kind of control over something. But you know, if it was about wanting to be thin, I think you would get to a point where you were like, you thought you felt you were thin, and you would stop. But that's the whole point. Like, it doesn't stop, it keeps going and keeps going, and you never feel like you're thin enough. And not everybody has that kind of eating disorder. You know, people have a lot of other different kinds of eating disorders as well. So yeah, and it's definitely not just about food either. Food is the way, again, that you kind of manifest the eating disorder. That's the way you control things. But it's not just food, and it's not like, oh, go and eat a banana and you'll be fine. So yeah, it's definitely not just wanting to be thin. So there's also quite a lot of misunderstanding about the types of eating disorder that there are, and a lot of people think that anorexia and bulimia are the only eating disorders around. And yeah, I guess those are the most well-known ones perhaps, but there are so many other like diagnosed eating disorders that people maybe don't know so much about. You know, there's binge eating disorder. I was diagnosed with an eating disorder not otherwise specified, which basically means I didn't quite fit into the diagnostic criteria for a specific eating disorder. There's something called orthorexia, which is being very, what's the word, like focused on eating like really healthily and clean and all that kind of stuff. There's all sorts of different eating disorders. So, you know, if you haven't been diagnosed with like anorexia or bulimia and you've got another diagnosis, it doesn't make your eating disorder any less valid or any less deserving of help. It just seems to be that people know of those two eating disorders, and the other kind of less well-known ones just aren't as well understood, which is why I guess it's important for us to talk about them and raise awareness, so that people understand that, you know, anorexia and bulimia aren't the only two eating disorders out there. And the last misconception that I would like to talk about eating disorders is that you cannot recover from an eating disorder. This is a difficult one, because I wouldn't say that I am recovered. I always just say that I'm in recovery, or that I'm recovering. I personally do think it is possible to recover from an eating disorder, and so do the charities and stuff. I think I've seen people recover from eating disorders and go on to live like normal healthy lives and have healthy relationships with food. I think it is so important to get help and treatment early. I think that's kind of where I struggled, because it took me a long time to get listened to and for people to believe almost that I had an eating disorder, and then to access the treatment. The longer it goes on, the harder it's going to be to recover from. But it's definitely not impossible to recover from an eating disorder, and I think it's so important that people understand that and understand how important early intervention in eating disorder treatment is. And that's one of the reasons why I wanted to make this video, because I want people to understand, you know, that a lot of these are just myths, and understand the symptoms to look out for, and to realise that like how diverse eating disorders are. It's difficult because there is so little help available because of funding and stuff, but I would just urge anybody that feels like they might have an eating disorder to go and get help and ask for help somewhere. I'm going to leave some links in the description bar for Beat, because that's got lots of like helplines and stuff, and also a couple of other like mental health websites that you can go and check out. But yeah, it's so important to reach out for help as early as you can, because like I said, I think with me, because my eating disorder symptoms had gone on for so long without any help, it makes it much more of a difficult process to get to a point of recovery. And yeah, like certainly when I was in the grips of my eating disorder, I could not see any kind of possibility of ever living a normal life and ever like eating normally. And now I kind of, however many years later, I look back at that and realise like how far I've come. And yes, I still struggle with my weight and with food and with the thoughts around that, but I'm a hell of a lot better than I was. And sometimes I feel like, because I spent quite a long time, I think, working to try and be completely recovered. And for me, I've actually written a blog post about this. For me, I worked out that, you know, trying to be completely recovered just wasn't realistic, and it was putting a lot of pressure on myself, and I just continued to feel like a failure. And I've kind of changed my thinking a bit now, and yeah, now I look at myself as being in recovery, and that just takes some of the pressure off. So it allows me to have bad days, and it allows me to still have the thoughts sometimes, and not feel like I'm failing at recovery. I just do it on a day by day, like, you know, process, and some days are good, some days not so good, but I feel like I'm keeping on top of it and I'm doing better than I was. So for anyone that's struggling out there, like, please don't feel like you will never recover, or that you will never get better to a point of, you know, living a decent life without your eating disorder completely controlling you, because I promise you, like, it is possible to recover from your eating disorder. So I really hope that this has been a useful video and that it has helped you to understand, you know, some of the misconceptions about eating disorders, and that they are not generally correct. I'd really be interested to hear, like, if you've heard any stereotypes or misconceptions about eating disorders, either that you've had kind of directed at you, or or like questions and things that you've had about eating disorders that you don't necessarily know whether they're correct or not. I'm happy to answer like any questions that I can. Obviously I'm not a professional, but I can answer them from a sort of personal point of view. So yeah, I hope you have enjoyed it, and do check out the links below if you feel like you need any help or support or anything. If you have enjoyed it and you want to see more videos, I would really appreciate it if you could give me a like and subscribe to my channel. Leave me a comment as well. Again, like I said, I'd like to hear like your thoughts on stereotypes about eating disorders, and any questions that you have as well. And I'll see you in another video very soon. Bye!